we're here. I would like to welcome everyone to the early career panel. It will be a mix of both graduate students and early career psychologists. Um, just to give you an overview, each of our panelists will speak for a few minutes, no more than 5 minutes. Um, then we'll go into the breakout groups for about 15 minutes. There'll be small groups where we can have further discussion and ask questions and make comments. Then we'll return as to this group, and we'll ask the small groups to then share some of their observations and questions, and the panelists will respond to them. So without further ado, let's begin the introductions. I am I'll just go by the screen itself. Adam Natoli is the first up, if going by my screen. So Adam, would you like to start us off, please?
Sure, happy to. So, hello everyone. I'm Am Natoli, and I'm a tenure track assistant professor at Sam Houston State University. I have a traditional position where where my work is 40% teaching, 40% research, 20% service. And while as a professor there, I teach a variety of courses at the graduate and undergraduate levels, mostly courses in assessment, statistics, research methodology, and some clinical courses on a rotating basis. I'm also heavily involved in research, and my research is dedicated to understanding how we measure the things we measure. So my lab employs diverse methods of measurement and uses advanced statistics to study questions related to assessment, psychometrics, applications of artificial intelligence in psychology, and my love, psychodynamic concepts and theory. And then in terms of service, I'm heavily involved in Society for Personality Assessment. And I also hold positions in other organizations, such as board representative for APA's Committee on Psychological Tests and Assessment. And then outside of academia, I do some independent consulting on statistics, research methodology for students, researchers, small businesses, and some larger companies and organizations. So, don't hesitate to reach out if you need help with anything. Always happy to help. So I didn't originally plan to work in academia. In fact, I didn't even plan to go to college. Kind of had an interesting start. But I did eventually go to community college after high school because it was kind of the easiest option. As I said, I had a rocky start, but eventually started doing well in psychology. So I figured I'd be a therapist. And I transferred to a 4-year university where I was introduced to this thing called psychodynamic psychology, psychoanalysis, and it just kind of clicked for me. So still interested in being a therapist, I earned a master's at Eastern Michigan and completed a fellowship with the Michigan Psychoanalytic Institute while I was there, and then earned my doctorate at Adelphi University, where I was lucky enough to have Bob Bornstein as a mentor. Um, Over the course of my training, I started to love research more and more, enjoyed teaching to an extent. And so I applied for academic positions while I was out on internship, and Sam Houston State University took a risk and offered me a job. And I actually just finished my 4th year there. Um, in my short experience, I realized that academia is weird. And there's not too many of us in academia who advertise our psychodynamic identity. So I'm really excited that we're doing this event, and I hope we can start changing that trend of psychodynamic psychologists not pursuing academic roles, and those of us who are in academic roles kind of be more proud of our psychoanalytic leanings. So thank you everyone for being here, and hopefully we could help with that.
Great, thank you. Ken Levy.
Okay, hi. My name is Ken Levy. I'm a faculty member at Penn State University, where I'm a tenured full professor at this point. And like Adam, I like the way he phrased it. The role of an academic in a university typically is considered 40% research, 40% teaching, 20% service, although I sometimes joke I do 100% teaching, 100% research, and 100% service. because there are long weeks. But I love academia. I love being in academia. The sensibility resonates with me because I wake up in the morning and I get to think about the kind of things I'm interested in and talk to people who are interested in those things and teach about those topics. And I get to write about it and publish on it and present at conferences on these topics, as long as I can convince other people that what I'm interested in is important enough that other people should be interested in it too. And I think psychodynamics, in psychoanalytic theory, we haven't always done that well, but I think we're doing it better, and I certainly have tried for myself and certainly for psychoanalysis, which I'm deeply committed to. My path to academia is also one that was unexpected. I don't like to call it the accidental academic, but I do call myself the unlikely academic. I was first person in my household to go to college, and I'll share this publicly for the first time, although I've shared it with a few people previously. I had several learning disabilities, and it affected my ability in elementary school and throughout high school. Dyslexia, dysgraphia, a bunch of speech impediments. I used to stutter. Sometimes I can still feel the stutter in the back of my throat when I'm talking at a conference or in a class. And despite all that, and not having any idea what college was about, I knew I wanted to go to college. I got to college and I got exposed to psychology, which was something I knew I was interested in early, but I had no idea what the path was to becoming a psychologist. And the best example of a psychologist that I had in my mind was either Sigmund Freud or Judd Hirsch in Ordinary People. And so I was aspiring to be more of Judd Hirsch in Ordinary People, but got exposed to research and discovered that I actually love research. I love the idea of the way you think in research and the way you go about examining questions that you have and answering those questions. And I was lucky to have been exposed to excellent mentors. Joe Masling, initially at the University of Buffalo, who was an example of somebody who valued clinical work and research, and his students, people like John Auerbach, Paul Duberstein, Bob Bornstein, they all envisioned that integration of science and practice. So while I was learning that the scientist practitioner model was as rare as Bigfoot or Loch Ness Monster, I saw it in front of me all the time in Joe Masling and his students. And then I I had Phil Shaver as a mentor. I was lucky and fortunate, not a clinician, but certainly taught me a lot about thinking like a scientist who cares about applied issues. And then I was fortunate enough to work with Sid Blatt, who I worked very closely with, and who really imparted the seamlessness of moving between research theory and clinical work. And all these individuals, sans Phil, had clinical practices as well as doing research. And that's something that was the model I had. And I didn't realize you had to pick one and go in one direction. Sid had a big clinical practice. He was also the director of psychiatry at the medical school at Yale. So this is what I was exposed to, and it resonated with me about how I wanted to run my life. I joke sometimes with my students that if I won lotto, I would wake up the next morning as early as I usually do, which is about 5:30, be in the office by 7:30 like I normally am. I would just drive up in a nicer car. I'd be wearing a better suit. And I used to say I'd have a better haircut. Now I'll tell you I have hair plugs. But other than that, I love what I do, and I want to see people be able to engage in it. I've had other role models that have been really important. Someone like Drew Weston, who I never worked with directly, but I observed his career. I got to meet him and become friendly with him. I noticed that the way he worked is that he was publishing in mainstream journals. And this was something that became important to me. Phil did the same thing, Joe Masling did the same thing, Sid, of course. And I realized I didn't want to necessarily just preach to the converted in terms of psychoanalytic journals, but I wanted to actually publish in mainstream journals and try to have an impact more broadly in psychiatry and in science in general. I've been able to do that. I do like publishing in psychoanalytic journals when I have something that I think would be of interest to psychoanalytically oriented people in particular, and that's something I watched Sid and Drew do there too. The one last thing I'll say, and I don't know whether I'm close to my 5 minutes or not, I'm trying to talk fast so that I can get as much in as possible, but I've been doing this now for 25 years. It's really, other than when I look in the mirror and I see my gray and balding head, It's hard to actually imagine that I've been doing this for 25 years because I still feel like a kid in a candy shop when I wake up in the morning. But in those 25 years, I've actually applied for jobs several times. I actually went and looked through my records in preparation for this, and I'm embarrassed to say I applied to jobs in 25 years, 10 different years, although I'll say seriously only 3 or 4 of those years. And I can say more about that. I've mentored about 15 undergraduates into academic jobs and 10 graduate students into academic jobs and 3 postdocs into academic jobs. So I have a lot of experience. I've been on P&T committees. I've been on search committees. I've headed search committees. And so I have that experience of seeing sort of like how the inside or how the sausage is made, so to speak, in terms of how you sort of maneuver through this. And I try to, share that generously with my students or anybody who's interested. There are several people who I think are signed up for this that I've been in contact with because I've crossed paths with them. And I know many other people, on this panel would do the same. So I will simply say that if anybody is interested in an academic career, which I think is immensely satisfying, please reach out. I'm happy to talk and give advice where I can. The one last thing I will say is I like the distribution of what I do. It's not just teaching, research, and citizenship in terms of service and administrative stuff. I also have a clinical practice and I do clinical supervision. And that's not part of what the university pays me for other than what I do within the clinical training program. But I am allowed as part of my contract to do consulting work, which includes psychotherapy. And so I do have a practice and I do consulting work in that regard. So you can see a lot of patients, you can do a lot of supervision, and you can still do your research and teach and have some administrative role. So with that, I'll end.
That's great, Ken. Thank you very much. Next up is Marissa.
I'm actually not doing an intro.
You're not
Pass
doing it.
it.
Okay. Well, the
I'll
next
pass
up
it to
is
whoever's next. Thank you, then.
okay. Next up is Smash.
Thanks, John. So I'm Smash. I've already introduced myself to you all, so I'll just say that again that I'm a 5th-year student. I'm in my internship year. I go to Pace University, and I'm here to moderate with John. I think next on my list, if you want me to introduce the next panelist, is Sharon.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Sharon Nelson. I'm a non-tenure track assistant clinical psychologist faculty at Penn State University. I've been here for just over a year or so. So very early as far as an academic position. Although if I hadn't put a filter on, you'd be able to see there's a few more gray hairs than that might imply, partly because I am coming from the VA system. So I was there for a few years. I'm still affiliated there as an evaluation specialist for the Center for Evaluation and Implementation Resources. And so, I mentioned that because my job there was heavily involved with teaching and spreading understanding of implementation science and evaluation, which I think are really relevant to what this group is interested in, which is how do we spread training and clinical work we know are valuable, but maybe have not been spread as widely as some other models. So my current job is a third clinical supervision, a third teaching clinical courses to PhD students in clinical psychology, and a third of my own clinical work and admin. I'm heavily involved in service, like with the International Society for the Study of Personality Disorders and Emotions Matter. I'm involved in research and program evaluation, and I really enjoy having these things that I do for enjoyment without the pressure of needing certain levels of grants. So, there was a point where I was looking at some academic medical centers or different types of positions as someone coming from a really low income background and having kids and family and things like that. I knew that I would not be as happy in a soft money dependent grant requirement type of setting. So I've really enjoyed the assistant clinical faculty role, because you really get to be very involved in teaching and clinical training in a way that doesn't have some of the pressures that might have that might be things that might be putting people off of some types of academic positions. My undergrad mentor, which was Ken Levy, he's on the call in case you didn't see that, and my grad school mentors, like especially Steve Huprick, or similar people, were all very dynamic. However, a lot of my grad school training was in a program that was very CBT. They like to say they were big B CBT at times. And then a lot of my clinical training in the VA was CBT or DBT in nature. So it meant that I sought a lot of clinical training in different settings and through different avenues. It also meant that I've had a lot of experience in an interest in sort of psychotherapy integration, multi-orientation training. But most importantly, I've been navigating, discussing my psychodynamic interests and training in multiple settings and non-psychodynamic settings for a good couple years now, which has really been involved a lot of learning how to discuss these things and sell ideas in ways to people that maybe have different ideas. And so I can happy to talk a little bit about how I talk about these things in interviews and such in a sort of values framework and sell them that way. Yeah, so I don't want to talk too long. I'm excited for the breakout rooms, happy to answer questions for anyone, but really excited to talk about with people who might be interested how these sort of growing numbers of clinical faculty positions can be great options for people interested in helping to train next generation of clinicians. John.
Okay, thank you, Sharon. Next up would be Stephanie.
Hi, everyone. So exciting to see you all here. I'm Stephanie Kors. I use she, her pronouns. So I'm a tenure track assistant professor in clinical psychology at Loyola University, Maryland in Baltimore. And I teach in the PsyD program and the Master's Mental Health Counseling program. And my job is probably kind of most similar to Adam's. I have a pretty kind of even split between teaching and research. And I think I'm kind of a little bit teaching heavy. So I teach 3 courses a semester. One of those is like a supervision course. So that's kind of integrated into what I do, which is really nice. And I teach mostly like psychotherapy and assessment courses from a psychodynamic perspective. Some of those are kind of under the radar. I do teach like an actual psychodynamic therapy course, but then sometimes I teach, clinical interviewing, and it's very much from a psychodynamic perspective. So I always like to just share that, you can do some of that teaching, even if it's not kind of explicitly that's what you're asked to teach. And then I have my own research lab where I study I have 2 different lines of research. One is understanding mechanisms that underlie generational trauma, which I very much use a psychodynamic perspective, but I think kind of as Kirtland Bonds mentioned earlier, like some of that is like speaking in layman's terms and maybe not using psychoanalytic terminology explicitly and publishing in non-psychoanalytic journals, which I think was really helpful in kind of getting the position that I wanted. And then my other line of research is looking at psychodynamic pedagogy itself. So it's very psychodynamic. And I'm kind of out and proud about that. And some of that research has been supported by the American Psychological Foundation and the International Psychoanalytical Association. And so I like to kind of highlight that you can kind of have like explicit psychodynamic research and succeed in like a tenure track position. And also I think, especially if you're not going to be in an explicitly psychodynamic program, having research that people outside the field can connect with, and maybe you're using terminology that's, developmental psychopathology or attachment or those kinds of words that we kind of know what they mean, can be useful. In terms of my background, so I did a PhD in clinical psych at the University of Tennessee. I went through a program that was kind of used to be primarily psychodynamic, and these days is not so much. There were kind of like a couple psychodynamic faculty when I was there. And so what I did to kind of fill in that gap, because I had real interest in psychodynamic work, was I got really involved in this kind of local psychoanalytic society who, like, I just felt so fortunate. Like, they really welcomed me in with open arms. And I really always encourage students to like seek out those opportunities. And oftentimes these societies are like so excited to have early career folks to join. So I really recommend that. And then after I graduated, I did a 2-year postdoc fellowship at Cambridge Health Alliance in the program for psychotherapy in Boston. And this was like an kind of 80-20 clinical and research. So I was doing like long-term psychodynamic therapy, and then 20% of my time was psychodynamically focused research. And I like to highlight that piece just because I think it is actually pretty uncommon to do a clinical postdoc and then go into a tenure track position. But it, if you're keeping your research and your teaching active, it can actually be like a unique skill set that you bring, because I think there are a lot of clinical faculty that don't practice clinically. So as long as you're keeping everything active, if that's an interest, like, go do it. And then the last thing I was going to say is just that I taught adjunct throughout my PhD and postdoc, and I think that was really useful in like getting the kind of position that I wanted in academia, to show like I have teaching experience and I can teach at all of these different levels. And yeah, like Ken mentioned too, I have a private practice on the side, and I see about 5-10 patients a week, and my department's been completely supportive of that, and it helps kind of buffer academic salaries. And it's just like a really lovely job to kind of be able to do lots of different things, both within your job, but also to have time for other things outside of your job. So I really love this job. So excited to be here and be in conversation with all of you.
Thank you. And lastly, Bevan.
Hi, I'm Bevan Campbell, and Leora Trube invited me to be on this panel because she wanted someone who could speak to the experience of being involved in academia as an adjunct. And I am currently an adjunct at 2 universities, at NYU and at Pace University. I did not set out to teach at all. I went to a PsyD program, and the faculty of that program, who were of various orientations, were all PhDs. No one who was a student in my program ended up in academia. I became more interested in teaching and sort of really in the idea of like how we teach psychoanalytic thought and psychoanalytic theory, in part through my involvement in the Psychotherapy Action Network. So I'll give a shout out to Linda Michaels, who I see is here. But through that organization, and in learning more about really the very problematic ways that psychoanalytic theory is taught, particularly, for undergrads, really got me sort of interested in preserving that theory being taught in like really nuanced ways. And so I was offered a job teaching, and it actually wasn't a course that had anything to do with psychoanalysis. It was a personality course, and then I taught a history course. But even within those courses, I found there were really a lot of ways to sort of convey information about what psychoanalysis is and isn't. So in my history course, for example, really being able to talk about the context of why there's so many more outcome studies for CBT than for psychoanalysis, and what does that actually tell us, and what does it not tell us about the effectiveness of these treatments. I think one thing I'll say about being an adjunct, I definitely think there's a lot of criticism, most of it very fair, about the ways that universities use adjunct labor. But I do want to say that one thing that I think is, at least the feedback I've gotten from students is, I have a full-time clinical practice. And so my teaching draws heavily on my clinical work. And I think that's something that students have commented a lot on. And, we've been sort of talking in this conference today about like the siloing of of research and of clinical practice, and how they've sort of been kept apart, really to the detriment of the entire field, not just in the realm of psychoanalysis. So I think finding ways to bridge the gap between actual clinical practice and teaching students has been really important. And I think being an adjunct allows me to do that. So in that sense, it's been really rewarding. And currently I'm teaching a class for doctoral candidates on psychoanalytic theory. And one of the things I'm most interested in is like, how do we, because in some programs, students are lucky if they're exposed to a single course on psychoanalytic theory. And so if students are really just given one course, what is the best way to present this very complicated field of knowledge and thinking and get people excited about it? And so I'm really interested in talking to people about ideas about how to teach this topic at the graduate level, how to get people interested, particularly when they're not going to be given potentially as much exposure as, say, I was, or perhaps you were as a graduate student. So yeah, I look forward to hearing more from other people. Thank you.
Thank you, Bevan. Smash, have we left anyone out who's supposed to give an intro?
I don't believe so. I think this
Nope.
is yeah.
I was invited very last minute, so I'm probably not on the list. But I think I'm officially here in a moderator capacity just so that we can keep our breakout groups smaller. So I can give a short intro.
Yeah, please. Thank you,
Okay.
Amy.
All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Amy Taylor. I'm a clinical psychologist and psychoanalyst. So I'm probably a good person to talk to about sort of finding, I don't know, like different pathways through the field or through your career. So I have a full-time academic position. I work at Fielding Graduate University. They have a APA accredited clinical psych PhD program. It's kind of an unusual program in that it's distributed. So they're, headquarters in Santa Barbara, but then students are located across the US and Canada, and we meet in different groups, every couple of months. So I'm the faculty for the New England area. So all of the New England area students are my advisees. And then otherwise we're working remotely. So at Fielding, in addition to being the advisor for New England students, I have an endowed chair role in qualitative research. I run a university level initiative in psychodynamic approaches, not just therapy, but thinking psychodynamically. So part of the reason I sought out this position was because it's extremely flexible. It allows me to also parent and do a lot of private practice, and also hold a part-time role at the Austin Riggs Center. So basically my trajectory was I graduated from Duquesne University a while ago, I think 2012, which is a fantastic place, but sort of off the beaten track in terms of its approach. So it's an existential phenomenological and psychoanalytic program. And I'd always intended to go into academia, but decided I wanted to sharpen my clinical skills more. So took a postdoc at Austin Riggs and then got hired onto the staff. And then finally, after 10 years or so, got back into working academically. So now I'm a much more, I think, clinically informed academic than I was before, but sought out this position that offers a lot of flexibility to both engage in clinical practice and live the rest of my life, but that also is very open to qualitative, psychodynamic, and humanistic approaches.
Thank you, Amy. So I think we'll go ahead and we'll move on to our breakout groups. Thank you all. I think we made it there and back maybe much easier this time than last. So this time, we're able to see you, you're able to see us. So we're gonna invite you to pose questions in the chat, and John and I will we'll keep an eye on and moderate those, but you can also feel free to use the hand raising function if you want to ask your question directly, and we'll have a bit more of a conversation. So whoever wants to start, I welcome. Okay. We got one question in the chat, which is, how do we change the training model to include more opportunity for funding? This is to our panelists.
When you say the training model to have more funding, do you mean like the institutions themselves having more money for stipends for graduate students? Or are you talking about funding agencies in terms of grants for research projects or fellowships, having more money for psychoanalytically oriented people? Because I think those would be different.
So I think that we mean more the first question, but both actually.
Okay. So in terms of so training programs having more funding for students, that's a very complicated thing to answer, at least at the level of the university providing that money. Now, if there are outside organizations like Division 39 or the American Psychoanalytic Association that want to set up fellowships to supplement or to provide resources, that can be done probably more directly through those. I'll let somebody else speak if they have other thoughts or ideas.
I'll mention something something I do whenever I write a grant, I always write in student research assistant funding, whether I expect to need it or not. And pretty much always I can use that. And so that's an alternative way to fund students. There's also, I remember as a student, there are different opportunities out there to get funding for training opportunities, that when it comes to grants, it's kind of a shotgun approach. Just apply to everything and eventually something sticks to the wall, and then it starts the snowball effect where if you get a training grant, someone else is going to see that, oh, this organization gave them a training grant, we better connect our name to them too, and it just gets rolling. So be creative and just apply for things. And unfortunately, a lot of that burden ends up being on the student, but it's also something that I think faculty can facilitate, especially if students say they're interested in trying to get something funded.
I mean, that's a good point about supplemental money that you can get from small grants. So, and sometimes that can make a big difference, because if your stipend's low and you get $3,000 more, that can make a big difference. And it's actually something I had done when I was in graduate school. And certainly as a faculty member, when you write grants, you get money to cover students. But if you're working in departments that don't have faculty or who are getting grants, they're not going to be able to necessarily do that.
So we have a lot of questions coming in. I'm going to try and cover some themes. One of them seems to be a connection between having an academic position and private practice, closing the gap. And also there's a question about economic stability, about salaries for academic positions, what the incentive is for academic positions as opposed to private practice, which can be a little bit more lucrative. So yeah, holding private practice and academia together in this question of economic stability.
I think I don't have a lot to say, but having, come through a couple of different pay systems, it's true that starting pay for some academic positions can be lower than starting pay for some other positions. And from being in communication with my friends in private practice, once you've been in academia for some years, it can even out a little bit by the time you're covering all the expenses of a private practice. So just one thing to consider is I think that sometimes the starting salaries for different types of positions look really different. The other thing I like is that with many or most, I'll say many academic positions, you can have both. And I think that that's really lovely because there are stressors that come with private practice, as far as needing to keep full caseloads and just different things. And so I personally have enjoyed the economic stability that comes with a salaried position, while knowing that, many of us can supplement that with private practice consulting, other kinds of work.
I'll
Yeah.
second that. The flexibility to do outside work is, I think, quite large in academia relative to what I ignorantly assume our other careers have. But something that I think I wish I knew earlier is when you're looking at positions or offers or things like that, a good question to ask is what summer salary can look like. So are people getting one class over the summer, or are people able to get 3 classes over the summer? Because
Or
that's
research money.
or research money.
Because at Penn State, they give you summer salary not to teach, but actually do your research.
Yeah, and asking that because a lot of academic positions are 9 months. And so knowing whether you have something substantial over the summer or not could change quite a bit. And then there are quite a bit of academic positions that can also be 12 months. So asking that and knowing how to navigate those types of differences can be helpful in understanding what economic burden you might face or lack thereof.
And one thing to say in that regard, most academic positions at universities are 9-month or 10-month salaries, and you have the opportunity for summer salary, which could supplement you by 20 to 30%. And knowing whether it's available or not is important. But you also allow 20% consultation, so you can easily supplement your salary in hours 20%. But I would say I probably supplement my university salary almost equal in consultation to my university salary. And so, that's not something I think I could have done when I was very junior, but still I could supplement it. So there are ways of supplementing. I have a colleague who actually would sit down with students on a whiteboard and show them that if you look at what you'd make in private practice and all the expenses, and Sharon just referenced this, that actually what your pay at a university is equal or better, particularly if you're at a well-paying university. And there is a lot of differences in universities in terms of how they pay. And I realize there's a hand up, so I'll stop in case that.
Thank you. I see we have a hand up. So Alexi, if you want to.
Thank you so much. I was thinking that, there's a larger issue, which I think is systemic, is if we'll sort of look at it, that when psychoanalysis was the dominant force, we were doing well. And then it stopped being so. And we are losing ground. We're losing ground with prospective students, with patient, and with funding agencies. So we can be honest about it and admit that we've got issues, as opposed to being in a victim position and blaming, whatever. And one of the issues, I think, is communications. We don't speak human. We continue to walk around saying, I'm an ego psychologist, and nobody cares about that outside of psychoanalytic circles. Shedler advocates about that a lot. He said that when, various schools of psychoanalysis talk to each other, they sound like personality cults. Well, there is no university departments of Darwinism. There's departments of evolutionary psychology. So what we need to do is to streamline the communications and to say something like the effect size of our therapy is 3 times as high as the effect size of SSRIs for depression specifically. We're not a panacea. We're good for some circumstances, but not others. And this is the message, because, we're not doing that. In terms of research, peer reviewers are flooded right now. They're just drowned in papers being generated by AI and, certain countries, no names mentioned. And we need to say in a paragraph of text why our work matters. And we're failing. We're saying we have psychodynamic research. Again, nobody cares. We need to show them how is it better? Why is it relevant? Why are we better at helping people in some circumstances than others? And the same with students. I mean, they need to ask themselves the question, why? Why go in here makes sense. One of the things we can say is that our work results in lasting changes, not a Band-Aid. And I think that this is a pertinent discussion as opposed to all the other issues. I mean, AI is taking over. University systems are changing big time. Forget psychology. I mean, people are revising the concept of a major. It could be that in 5 years' time, undergrad programs are going to look they're very different from what they are now. And the traditional college idea may change. We're not up to speed with time. We're continuing to operate in concepts that are 50 years old. And I think that's part of the problem. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Do any of our panelists want to respond?
I mean, I'll just say real quickly that I think that's a lot of what people on the previous panels were talking about, whether it was Usha or Kirkland, you know, or Stephanie or myself. You know, we talk about using language that's accessible to everyday listeners. I don't use the word tech neutrality when I'm talking to my cognitive behavioral colleagues, because if I did, they'd have no idea what I'm talking about. And instead I talk about, maintaining a non-judgmental stance, or staying equidistant from, all sides of the patient's concerns. I don't talk about countertransference, because I find that people have a strong countertransferential reaction to countertransference. Instead, I say, it's important as a therapist to be aware of what's evoked in you as you sit across from a patient or another human being. That resonates with them. This is what Jonathan Shedler, as you mentioned, was talking about. When you write grants, to funding agencies, you certainly can't use analytic phrasing, because they won't understand what you're talking about, or they may evoke some biases. So, one of the grants I'm most proud of is I got a grant from NARCED, which is now the Biological Brain Disorders Foundation, and I got it on attachment, which is something that they hate, but I called it social cognition. Apparently they like it a lot better when you call it social cognition. So, you have to learn, and I think Adam was saying this kind of thing too, you have to learn how to use that language, not just because of the pragmatics of getting a grant from a foundation, but also because it's actually just the way to communicate with people. You can use jargon when you're in an institute and you're talking to your colleagues, but you can't use jargon when you're talking to undergraduates or CBT graduate students, or you're at a conference that's a general psychology conference and not a conference that's for a specific group of psychoanalytic thinkers. And that's something we all have to train ourselves to do. But I think that many of the people here at this conference are good examples of people who have figured out how to successfully do what it is they're interested in doing, and get funded and get promoted and things of get hired and things of those nature, that nature. So I don't want to say that it's really a doomsday at all. I don't think it is. I think it's about sharing the roadmap with people so that other people can actually, go along similar paths if they so desire. And part of it is figuring out what you want to do with your life. A lot of people I talk to say, and somebody mentioned this earlier too, I want to be involved in scholarship. I want to write. I want to supervise. I want to teach, but I don't know what that path is. And I think, if your sensibilities are to do those things, and I want to do clinical work, then this is a good pathway.
Thanks, Ken. I see we have another comment. Sean?
Yeah, I just had a question if some of the panelists can feel free to speak candidly about this as much as possible. So in terms of how long-term some academic positions can be, and they can lock you into, a job for 10, 20, 30 years, I'm just wondering, to what extent there were certain questions or things that you were looking for in a position, and on the flip side, if there were any red flags or things that really turned you away from positions, and how you would kind of decipher that and discern that in interviews or in your own search process.
That's such a good question. And I just will contribute one thing, because I think there's a lot of red flags I could talk about in different things, but specific to the sort of purpose of this format, I'll say that one of the things I did on interviews was really talk pretty clearly about what my academic values were. Because I wasn't interested in going somewhere that said, yeah, it's okay that you do psychodynamic stuff and we're okay with that, and you get there and then you don't feel respected or accepted. So I was very clear when I was describing what I was looking for, what that meant for me and what values, and how I was looking for places that respected and generally respected and integrated different things. And I think that was important, because in those discussions, there was a few places that answered in ways that were pretty clear red flags, and there was some that answered in ways that felt genuine, and like I would be respected and would be a good fit there.
I would just add to that, to what Sharon said. I think how collaborative and supportive the department that you'd be joining is. I think there are a lot of like very kind of competitive and sometimes toxic departments that you can join. And when I was interviewing for positions, I could really easily get a sense of like, is this a department that likes each other, that wants to tenure their faculty, that like wants people to stay, that people stay for their career, or people like trying to get out pretty quickly. And then I think just going off of that also, you know, particularly in the kind of time we're in right now, how supportive is the administration for the university? How, you know, are they supportive of faculty? Are they going to have quite a bit of, you know, power over kind of what you can or can't do as an academic? So those are the kind of big things that I think about.
All right,
That help?
go ahead, Ken. I think someone was gonna go ahead and talk, so feel free. No, okay, then I'll move us on to our next question. There seem to be a couple about how to leverage, and what resources students and early career professionals can leverage to get into academic positions. There's questions about getting into research as students early in the program, late in the program, or folks who've been out of school for some time, pursuing psychoanalytically focused dissertation topics or research, and any other resources that one might want to leverage in the time they have ahead of or in pursuit of an academic position.
I think for me, the biggest resource has been the people that have been around me, mentors, peers, everything like that. And throughout my career, I always tried to take advantage of what's in the program, but also go outside of my programs and find other opportunities for research, for training, things like that. And really try and surround myself with people who are better than me. And then this way I could learn from them and also be challenged by the work that we're doing together. And that, I really think I think networking, especially in this psychodynamic field where, you know, psychology as a field is small in academia, and then psychodynamic people in academia are just a real small community. And I've never had an experience where someone said, sorry, I don't have time to mentor you in this psychodynamic field. I think people, and I can't speak for those further in their career, but even me, like I'm hungry to mentor younger individuals in, you know, the ways of psychodynamic research. And I think just asking, you're going to be overwhelmed with the amount of resources that you can get from these networks. And so putting yourself out there and asking, it's been incredibly helpful for me.
There are small grant programs. There are conference travel awards. They don't pay that much, but they can help you get to conferences. There are small grants, as I said, that can cover significant portions of your research. Some can supplement salary or stipends. Those things are worth pursuing. And I think Adam said, you know, you want to apply broadly. He called it a shotgun approach. I'd say you want to apply broadly. It's useful to actually, you know, try to maximize the places that you think that you'll do best with in terms of your interest matching their goals. That's something that came up in our group, talking about something to that effect. Mentors are really important, but you know, ultimately you have to watch your career yourself, and that means actually making sure that you know, are moving forward. You know, I always try to do a little bit every day and move things forward. Ultimately, in academia, writing is the most important thing because that's how they evaluate you, is like on what you publish. Now, often I find that students have these wild fantasies that you need to have 20 publications, all first author in top tier journals, and it's not that at all. But you have to have something that you can point to saying, here's something I worked on, here's something I contributed to, here are my thoughts. And depending on what institutions you want to apply to, it could be more or less. And sometimes you might have to do a postdoc in order to let some of those publications accumulate. And sometimes there are places you can go on internships that actually carve out time to do research. Not a lot of them, but some. You have postdocs where they might carve out time to do research, and that can help you get, time to do what it is that you need to do. But those are the kind of things I would be thinking about. And there are lots of grant opportunities out there. You have to search them, and that's one thing mentors are great about, telling you where you can actually find a grant. In fact, I tell my students the first thing you do when you read an article is not actually look at the title or the authors, is you actually look at the author note and see where they got their funding from in the article, because that might be something that you can actually utilize for your work. And so, it's a little bit hidden, but you can scratch the surface and find some funding too.
In our last few minutes, I wonder if the panelists could take a minute or so, or less than a minute each, to share any advice that you would give to students and early career professionals who are looking to enter the academic field.
I'll jump in and just say that I think, as I think you've heard from a number of us, that there's a lot of different ways to get involved in the academic field, and I think that a lot of people are intimidated about some of the options just based on things they've heard, or misconceptions about sort of there only being one route or what that might look like. And so, I think that a lot of us would be happy to talk more with people about different kinds of routes and avenues and reaching out to other people, but just not ruling it out as an option, since there's so many different ways to be involved in academia in ways that feel meaningful and important, and that you can fit to what your interests are, as far as how you want to be involved.
I would recommend really taking some time to know yourself and know what your priorities are, especially in like work-life balance and stuff like that, because academia has a lot of opportunities to sacrifice things outside of academia to do things in academia. And I think if you go in knowing a lot about what you want to do and what balance you want, it's going to help prevent a bad experience, and prevent people going into academia thinking, oh my God, I have to give up my life to do well here, and then leaving. So I encourage you to know what balance you're looking for and stick to it.
I would say don't be a lone wolf. So like try to connect with other people. If you're hoping to get a tenure track job that involves research, ask if you can help with someone's project that's already going on. You don't have to start your own from scratch. If you're interested in teaching, then go talk to someone who's teaching a class that maybe you'd want to teach. And people really do want to help. And it's not one of those things that you should kind of have to do on your own. So reach out to people, and a lot of us really do want to help. So don't hesitate.
Don, do you want to go?
Sure. I would recommend that you focus on what you're really interested in and what you're passionate about, and try and involve yourself in a professional organization that covers that particular area and topic. And don't be afraid to collaborate. It's wonderful to collaborate with people and to find others who have that same passion for those interests that you have. And by doing so, I think that you can you know, you can maintain your passion. You can see what's being done empirically or what's being written about, and you can get a better idea how you can then use that to enter academia, be it an adjunct position, being a full-time position in a R1 institution, or an a PsyD program where you're going to mainly teach your clinical skills. But start out by knowing what you love and what you want to pursue, and follow that as best you can. I think you'll be in good stead.
I agree with what everyone said, but I actually just want to highlight what John said about being involved in organizations. It's where you actually become not a lone wolf, but you become connected to collaborators. You see what the cutting edge work is. It generates ideas in your head. You actually can collaborate with people. So I would definitely second that. The one thing I was going to actually say, and this is very different, is actually advocate to Division 39 and other organizations you might already be in, asking them to actually put on some programming about how do you apply for jobs? How do you get a grant? How do you publish in a journal? One thing about hanging out in a CBT world, which, you know, I'm in a program where I'm one of two psychodynamic tenure line faculty, but we have several other psychodynamic people in our program, and it values it. But I have a lot of CBT colleagues, and one of the things I see is how they mentor their students by running all these panels where they're teaching them how to apply for grants, how to use R, how to apply for jobs, etc., and how to get you know, there should be an editors panel at Division 39 that talks about submitting articles to journals and so forth. There should be a panel on submitting to all the different psychoanalytic foundations that are out there that have grants, so that people can start doing those things. And, you know, I was just at Division 39 this past year, and there were actually only 2 presentations that had the word research in it out of all the presentations there. Mine was one of them, and there was another one, and that's it. And so, you know, you're not going to get what you need from them unless you advocate to them saying, we want more of that. Same thing with other places, local analytic institutes or the American Psychoanalytic or some things like that.
Thank you, Ken. I'll just say that Bevan also mentioned that serving as a community supervisor is a way to get connected to a program and learn more about its culture. And so we'll end there, but we'll ask you to sign out of this meeting and to sign back in through the main portal to our wrap-up session. So thank you to our panelists, and thank you all for participating here.
Thank you, Smash.
Yeah, thanks, Smash.
Thank you.